Right.
Welcome to the Ask JP podcast, where we tackle the issues of the day. This is another episode in our ongoing criminal justice reform series, where we're interviewing candidates for the various criminal district court positions as well as the district attorney. Today, we have Mr. Steve Singer. With more than 30 years' experience as a law professor and public defender, Steve has devoted his entire career to representing the interests of the poor and powerless in the criminal legal system. In the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, Steve utilized his independence as a Loyola law professor to lead a total restructuring of the Orleans Public Defender's Office from a patronage system run by the judicial bench to an independent office of defense attorneys serving the public. As trial chief, Steve oversaw the transformation of the Public Defender's Office from a handful of attorneys in a single room to a professional law office with 120 attorneys and support staff. As a professor at Loyola Law School for over 10 years, Steve was in charge of a criminal defense clinic representing clients in Orleans Parish Criminal District Court who could not afford an attorney. At Loyola, Steve taught criminal law and procedure and ethics and has received numerous awards and recognition both locally and nationally for his commitment to his work. Steve and his wife, Janet Hofel, a professor at Tulane Law School, have proudly called New Orleans home for more than 20 years. They have two sons who were born and raised in the city and can't understand why anyone would want to live anywhere else. With that, we can totally agree. I don't understand why anyone. New Orleans is got its issues, but it's by far the most interesting city in the United States you can live in.
You got it right. You got it right there.
So let's get right to it, Steve. The first question, which is going to seem pretty expansive at first, but I think you can tackle it, is why do you want to be the magistrate judge?
It's a great question. Great first question. I believe that our criminal legal system is broken, that it's corrupted by the influence of money and bail bondsmen, and most importantly, by systemic racism. It's been infected by systemic racism from the beginning. This is not new, and it's certainly not new to people like you and Black people and people of color. It's just that now this is now coming, the general public is becoming more aware of it. And it's due to the consciousness raising efforts of people like yourself and the work you did leading the effort on Amendment 2 to end the Jim Crow era unanimous jury provisions in Louisiana. And that sort of has laid the groundwork for people now being aware. And now we all stand on the shoulders of other people. And I like to think I stand on the shoulders of people like yourself and other people who led the effort on Amendment 2, who have brought to Louisiana an understanding of the systemic racism in the system. Currently, 1 out of 3 people in the Orleans jail are there not because they're dangerous, just because they're too poor to make a money bail. And 4 out of 5 of those people are Black. In terms of judicial philosophy, as a trial judge, obviously, as you know, we don't make law like appellate judges do. We deal with individual cases and individual people. And my philosophy is that it's really important to treat everyone, and I mean everyone in the system, lawyers, people who are accused, victims, witnesses, police officers, the public, with compassion and respect. And in 20 years of my experience at the criminal court, and I know you know this personally because I know you spent years working at Tulane and Broad yourself on a daily basis, that really hasn't been consistently the case that there's been a lot of yelling and screaming, and has not been a happy, good place to work where people go to and feel like they're treated with respect and compassion. And I think as a trial court judge, that's one of the biggest things we can do.
I mean, I think you're definitely correct. I can tell you my time working at criminal district court, you felt like it was an off day when the judges weren't yelling at everyone. And I mean, it wasn't always they were yelling at the lawyers, which usually deserve to be yelled at. They spent a lot of time yelling at your clients. I mean, and about random stuff. I mean, like you said, when you talk about systemic racism, I cannot tell you how many times I would see my indigent clients who were literally yelled at for their attire, when in many cases, they're coming from work and they work in jobs that don't allow them to wear suits, or they've been in jail overnight. So obviously they haven't had a chance to take a shower and change. So you're 100% right. That really has been an ongoing issue. Piggybacking off that question, could you give me like a little deeper thought on kind of like, what do you think generally of the current state of the criminal court system at Tulane and Broad as far as its effectiveness and where things could be streamlined so that could be more efficient?
I think the biggest problem at the courthouse is the infection of money. There is just money all the way down the system. The court depends on, it's a user pay system. The court depends on fines and fees from defendants, getting a portion of the money bail, the sheriff, the court, everyone depends on all of these fines and fees. And I think that really, it creates an incentive for volume, quantity over quality. Because the only way a user pay system can work, since you're talking about poor people, and in New Orleans, that means poor Black people in the system, you're trying to bleed blood from a stone effectively to operate the court system. If we could get the court off, and what that means is you have to have lots of cases. You have to take a little bit of money from lots of cases. I mean, one of the greatest examples of that is drug testing. Drug testing, the drug testing program, it costs people $10 per drug test to take a drug test. They have to pay $10. Well, we all know if there were only 10 or 15 people taking drug tests, there's no way that would pay for. So consequently, you have judges ordering everyone to go get a drug test because that's the only way financially the system can work. And so I think the biggest thing is we have like, I know when I was running the public defender's office back in 2000, post-Katrina, 2005 to 9, there were maybe 10 to 12,000 case filings per year. Now it's probably down more around 5 to 7,000. But still, what we're doing is we're taking the relatively small number of really serious cases and we're burying them in this huge haystack of nonviolent minor petty offenses. And it's hiding the relatively small number of serious cases that we should be focusing on.
No, I mean, I think I got a whole 2 days next week dealing with DA candidates. And that's as someone who's a public defender, I know you were the chief public defender. The inability in New Orleans for the DA's office to properly screen cases and to allow cases that shouldn't go to trial, that should be in diversion, just to put everything at trial. When you want to talk about why the cost of the system is so expensive, it's expensive because the system requires it to be expensive. But let me go right into one of your central campaign points. What is your opinion of the cash bail system, and what would you do in the alternative if you're opposed to it?
Well, obviously, as you can see up there on my sign, as people have seen, my signs have in big red letters up at the top, "End money bail now." So I'm obviously opposed to the cash bail system. I'm not going to use cash bail or money bail to keep someone in jail. The whole idea of the bail system originally was it was supposed to allow someone to leave jail while their case was pending, not keep them in jail. But now we've flipped it around over the years, and it's used as a system that keeps people in jail, people who don't belong there. For the vast majority of people who pose no danger, I would focus on non-financial conditions of release that allow people to be in the community, get the services they need, like drug treatment or mental health treatment or job training, without losing their homes, without losing their jobs and families. This will benefit all of us. It'll make us a safer city, a better city with a higher quality of life, and it will also take the corrupt influence of bondsmen out of the system.
Okay. So basically, just as a follow-up, so the alternative would be, rather than doing cash bail, because people forget that oftentimes, and I remember when I used to deal with the Judge Jeruso, for example, when he was a magistrate judge, he used to always try to do an alternative of, listen, why don't you go get your GED? Why don't we agree that you go home, you go to your GED classes, as long as your person's telling me you're going to your GED classes, you can stay out on this charge. Like, there's a lot of flexibility with judges to make conditions of release not necessarily cash, and in some cases those conditions could actually lead to a better outcome than just releasing someone on an ROR in itself.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly it. The money shouldn't have anything to do with whether you're in jail or out of jail. It should strictly be based on public safety. And for the vast majority at criminal court who don't pose a danger, let's do things that help them and help our community. That's a great example. Have them go to GED classes, and as long as they're going and getting their high school diploma or GED or job training or whatever, let's keep them in the community.
Okay. let's go to another couple of ones. Some of these don't really pertain necessarily to magistrate court, but they're kind of general judicial questions. Like obviously, you're not dealing much with mandatory minimums in juvenile court. I mean, in magistrate court, but can you give me your opinion kind of on that practice?
Yes, I think that you're absolutely right. What it does is even though wouldn't be dealing with them directly, it does tell people about someone's overall judicial philosophy. I'm opposed to mandatory minimums because I think they box everyone in the system in. They box prosecutors, public defenders, and most importantly, they box judges in, and they prevent us from taking into account the individual circumstances of the case and of the person and of both people, the victim and the defendant. I mean, you have a lot of cases that involve not just domestic violence, but you also have cases involving theft or other things that are intra-family. And it can't be a one size fits all. That's what judges in court should be focusing on, is tailoring things to the individual needs of the case and the people involved.
Okay. And obviously another one that you probably won't be dealing with, the death penalty.
Although I've spent over 8 years as a lead trial counsel doing death penalty cases all around the state of Louisiana. I'm opposed to the death penalty. I think my experience is it's a waste of time and money. Colleagues of mine recently, last year, Bill Quigley and Calvin Johnson, who's the former chief judge and also was a former clinic professor at Loyola, did a study that shows that the death penalty, it's basically a $250 million government program that does nothing to advance public safety, and it's infected with racism. I mean, literally, in the last couple of years doing death penalty cases, taxpayers of Louisiana were paying me thousands of dollars to drive all the way up to Ruston, Louisiana, where Grambling State University is, to handle a death penalty case involving somebody who was 74 years old and was suffering from congestive heart failure. And I kept going up to court and I kept looking at the judge and prosecutor and wondering, the guy would come out in a walker and I'm looking at everybody like, what are we doing here?
You can literally just wait. You could wait. You just wait 6 years.
You're never executing this person. And yet the taxpayers were paying me thousands of dollars to make a 5.5 hour drive each way, 11 hours each way, to handle this death penalty case. If it was a non-death penalty case, the local public defender could have handled it and everything would have been just fine.
I will tell you, one of my biggest frustrations with legislator was I would talk to my colleagues who were pro-death penalty, and I would say, one, we don't ever execute anybody, just because. I mean, at this point, you can't even get the drugs unless you're going to a back alley in Mexico with some, off-label Drano. And it's one of those things where I don't see how you could be against big government and against government intrusion, but be okay with the government deciding to kill you. But that's we can diatribe on that for a while. Okay, so next question, judicial activism. Let me kind of define that question. So obviously there are kind of two schools of thought on whether judges should be activists. As in, one school of thought is see something, say something. If the law is wrong, if it's being wrongfully applied, you should ignore case law, interpret the law as you think the law should be, and rule that way. Or on the other hand, still want the predictability of case law. They want the judge to follow what's traditionally been done and to not be an activist in altering the law as they see it. So kind of where do you think you fit on that scale?
Well, let me just say this. I think this is an important question, especially for magistrate judge and for the magistrate section. I think the best thing I can do to change the system is to be honest and not depend on campaign contributions from those like bail bondsmen with a vested interest in extracting money from the system and from poor people. Now, if getting corruption and racism out of the system, if you consider that judicial activism, okay, then call me a judicial activist. But my belief is, if someone is not if you consider an activist, you know well that there are some state statutes that require a money bail. There are some that do require it. If I'm confronted with a person who's not dangerous in a situation where money bail is mandatory, I'm going to, and they pose no danger, and there are things we can do for them in the community, like drug treatment or getting a GED or high school diploma, I'm going to set a nominal money bond, small, $1, $5, whatever, comply with the law, and set other non-financial conditions that actually benefit the person, will reduce recidivism, increase public safety, and benefit the community. And again, if getting corruption and money and racism out of the system is considered activist, okay, then I guess I'm an activist. I don't see that as activism. I see that as judging and doing what's honest and what's right and what's best for the public.
Well, I mean, it's certainly, I can tell you one of the arguments I've made for years against mandatory minimums when judges come before us at the legislature and would say, we need these. It always kind of struck me that when it comes to the bail system, when it comes to mandatory minimums, judges have the freedom to do whatever the hell they really want. So when a judge goes, I need a mandatory minimum, you really don't, because if a guy's been in front of you 3 times and you want to throw the book at him, you have the book to throw at him.
You have the power.
You don't need the legislature to say, here, we're going to throw the book for you at the guy. You can do it yourself. So, I mean, I think that flexibility is always a good thing. So I know I've got an idea of how you're going to answer this question, but you should tackle it as well. Do you consider yourself a reform candidate? And if so, why?
I definitely, obviously consider myself a reform candidate. I'm committed to reform. I've been a public defender, as you said, representing poor people for my entire career. I haven't done anything else. I haven't taken private cases. I've always represented people who were too poor to afford a lawyer, and that's been since 1989, so over 30 years. I've committed my life to trying to fight for justice for poor people of color. And I've been trying to reform the criminal justice system here in New Orleans since 2005, since Katrina. I just want to do there was one thing that really sort of formed my impression of the system. When I first became a professor at Loyola Law School, the first case I ever handled with students at Tulane and Broad in the criminal court was a young 18-year-old woman who got a ride from somebody to a doctor's appointment. Unbeknownst to her, the car was stolen. The cops pulled up behind and tried to pull him over. The guy pulled the car over and bailed out and ran. Since she didn't know who it was and couldn't tell the cops his name, they arrested her for unlawful use of a stolen vehicle. And she went to magistrate court, and the judge set a money bond on her that she was too poor to make. When I went to go interview her with my students, within about 5 minutes, she broke down in tears crying. So I stepped in between my students and asked her what was wrong. And she said, I just miss my baby. And of course, I'm sure you're thinking in your head, the same thing I was thinking. She's got a 1-year-old, maybe a 6-month-old baby. I said, how old's your baby? 3 days. They arrested her and the judge set a money bond and sent her back to jail when she was 9 months pregnant. Because she was in jail, she had to go through the birthing process with no drugs, no epidural, no family members helping her. And as soon as she gave birth, they took the baby from her, opened the door, gave the baby to her mom, and shut the door and sent her back off to a jail cell. And I just thought to myself, my God, what are we doing? And it was just clear that I called up the judge. It was a Friday evening, got her cell phone number, called up the judge, got her released. But the public defender, the judge, the clerks, the bailiffs, the sheriffs, the prosecutor, it appeared that no one even looked up and noticed she was 9 months pregnant. They were just processing Black people off to jail as fast as they could, and no one was paying attention. And I'm like, okay, this is broken. We've got to change this.
Well, I mean, it's always amazing how, I mean, that story is absolutely heartbreaking. And sadly, I would say it's not unusual or something I've not heard of or the system. I mean, I remember, and I was talking to another candidate about this when I was working with one of my colleagues, Regina Barrow, in the Senate, and she had taken on the issue of how we make tampons available for women who are in jail. And I had not realized until she tackled it. Across the state was charging women in the commissary for tampons. So when you're working in jail, making license plates, getting 13 cents a plate, all the money you're making is not going to buy a pack of cigarettes, not going to buy a candy bar. It's going to hopefully make enough money so that during that time of the month where you need tampons, they're available. That is horrific. And I mean, she had to fight, I think, over two sessions to get the state to eat the 150, 200 grand a year for all the women incarcerated to make tampons free. And I mean, it's one of those things where you're like, the system is it's one of those times when people go, well, I mean, what are you saying? The system's run by old white guys? You're like, yes, the system is run by old white, old white guys. Because if these things aren't on their front radar, they don't really care. I mean, it's kind of, I mean, to your, that's a horrific story. That certainly, I would say, is formative to someone's philosophy. Because I can tell you when, I think, I'm totally going off script on this because I'm thinking of my own story that I had when I was a public defender. I had a young man. This is like one of my last cases before I left to run for rep. I had a guy who was accused of rape in Jefferson Parish, Hispanic, spoke very little English. And he was accused of rape in Jefferson Parish. He was arrested in New Orleans. We're doing first setting in Orleans Parish on it. And the DA in Orleans Parish came in with an aggravated rape charge, which, is like aggravated rape, automatic life in jail, whatever. So I'm like, I'm a magistrate, not supposed to be handling this, but because it was post Katrina, kind of do whatever you got to do. And I remember when we were arguing the probable cause on it, and I think it was in front of Judge Hanson, it came out pretty quickly in the conversations and the witnesses. The gentleman had met a lady at a bar. They had had sex. She had later come back and said that he had raped her. In the course of just the interaction between me and the victim and the individual and the witnesses, it came out pretty readily just by, digging a little deeper. The two people knew each other. They'd had sex multiple times previously. This time was different in that the boyfriend caught her having sex with him. So then she convinced the boyfriend that she didn't know this guy, that all this stuff had happened, that he was this illegal guy who jumped on her and raped her. And she had pressed these charges simply because it was the only way for her to cover with her boyfriend that she was not having an affair with this guy. And it was so surreal because this was a Caucasian woman with a Caucasian boyfriend. This was a Hispanic guy who was already, this is pre-Trump, based on deportation, all these different things, spoke no English. He didn't even know what was going on until we got him a translator. He was like, I don't know why I'm here. I thought this girl was my girlfriend. I don't know what's going on. And it's like, but for people, and I appreciate Judge Hanson for slowing things down and saying, before we go any forward, let's actually figure out his side of the story. Let's start talking to everyone involved. And I'm a public defender who was not qualified to be arguing probable cause on this at all. I mean, fortunately, I was successful in that it went from aggravated rape to like, God, here it was a lesser rape charge is what it got aggravated down to. So it go to a district court. But I mean, but for a judge slowing down the process to say, let's actually see what this guy has to say, this guy would have been in jail with a $2 million bond speaking no English on an aggravated rape charge. And I mean, to your point, I mean, I think that it's everyone has formative stories that kind of make them realize the system is broken. But let's go on because I know I'm just diatribing.
No, but it's important for people to know.
Yeah. How is campaigning during COVID?
Well, it's my first time in a campaign, so I can't speak to what it was like campaigning before. But I will tell you what I'm really more worried about is the people who are in jail with COVID. What keeps me up at night is thinking about the people who are in jail on a money bond just because they're poor and they're exposed to a life-threatening virus. And then even when we release them, even when somebody finally figures out, like in your situation, that the charge isn't as serious, that's something that is very different than what we initially thought, even when they make bail and they get out, now we're putting people who have been exposed to the virus in an enclosed, close group. We're putting them back into the community when they never should have been in jail there in the first place. So it seems to me, again, it's one of these things where as a magistrate judge, you need to slow down, think about what are we really doing here, thinking about what can we really do that most helps the community. And I think as magistrate judge during COVID times, the most important thing is before you send somebody off to jail where COVID is present on a money bail and they might get out, even on a low one where they might get out in 2 or 3 days, we're just making things worse in the community. So are there alternatives? Are there other things we can do? And to me, that's really what keeps me up at night, thinking about the court system and what's going on with COVID.
Okay. And the final question, so everybody keep it clean. Why are you more qualified than your opponent to be the magistrate judge?
Okay. Well, I think I'm more qualified because I really have a proven track record of not just bringing small little changes to the criminal legal system, but bringing the kind of broad-based transformational kind of change that we really need right now. And that, as I said at the beginning, we now see that we need, again, due to efforts like yours on Amendment 2 on the non-unanimous jury stuff, to educate us to the systemic racism, and that has now built over the summer and year with seeing other situations involving systemic racism. So I think what distinguishes me is my post-Katrina work on reforming the public defender's office. I've been both a line public defender for 10, 15 years, handling regular cases. So I have that nitty-gritty in the trenches perspective. I've also been a law professor and have sort of the 10,000-foot view overview perspective. And I think that gives one a different perspective. And then I've been there reforming the public defender's office. As you said at the beginning, I took the public defender's office, and as you know, it was severely underfunded. You were working in a system that was probably 1.5 to 1 in 3 to 1 under 2 million, well under 2 million per year to try and handle 10, 15,000 cases in criminal court, which was just not sufficient. There was only enough money to pay people like yourself part-time. There was one room in the courthouse. And in 3 years post-Katrina, I took that to 55 full-time lawyers. We made everybody full-time, gave them salaries comparable to the DA's office. Now they're about to get funding parity, or at least close to parity with the DA's office. 120 support staff, including social workers, substance abuse counselors, people that can actually help the community. And I think a public defender's office, a well-functioning one, can really help the court sift through and get the minor, nonviolent, non-serious cases out. So again, the system can be more efficient in terms of focusing on the serious cases. And I think that kind of transformational change that we brought to the system is what distinguishes me. I mean, with all due respect to my opponent, she was a part of the indigent defender program pre-Katrina, but she's been in the system for over 20 years, and she just has no record of bringing real large-scale transformational change, the kind that we need. As a commissioner, she was a commissioner for 6 years. She actually contributed to the racial injustice in the system by setting money bonds on just about everyone that came before her, including black people accused of minor offenses like possession of marijuana. I don't feel like I have to be at the front of the effort of reform, but I've always worked as a part of it. And I think that's what distinguishes me.
Okay. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's one other thing I'd like to add. We are on Zoom, we are on video. I know there will be an audio. So for those video on audio, I know JP, you may not know, it may be hard for you to tell, and people may not realize I'm a white guy. I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think it's important to acknowledge that I'm a white man, an older white man running for judge in a city that overwhelmingly incarcerates black people. I want to say that representation matters to me. I think it's important to have black judges. I think it's important to have black judges in New Orleans, across Louisiana, in our federal courts, and it's important to have black judges at the United States Supreme Court. But I also think that because white people built this broken system of mass incarceration that we have in the United States, we have a special obligation to undo it. And in the end, whether I'm elected or not, I'm going to work with my opponent. I'm going to work with all of the judges in the criminal court to undo this system of mass incarceration. But I think it's important for white people like me to recognize, hey, we built this. It's not just on other people who suffer from it to undo it. We've got to get in there in the trenches and start digging and help work alongside them and undo it.
No, I think that's an important point. Remember to plug what's your Twitter and your Facebook and your website?
It's at singerforjudge.com. Everything's at info at singerforjudge. And that's where I can be reached, www.singerforjudge.com.
All right. Well, I appreciate you coming in today, Steve. It's been great talking to you. And I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail 6 feet away, virtually 12 feet, probably.
It's been great, JP, and I really appreciated the similar story you told. As you said, we all have horror stories from.
We all have horror stories about the system.
All right.
Thanks,
all right.
Steve.
Thanks a lot. It's a great service you're doing for the voters, providing them with information on these down ballot races. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you.